She smiled at me like nothing was wrong. Warm, familiar, the kind of smile you don't question, the kind of smile you trust. I remember standing there, looking at her, thinking everything was normal, thinking whatever tension I had been feeling was just in my head. Because that's what you do when it's family. You doubt yourself before you doubt them. But what I didn't know was what was behind that smile. She had already started something quiet, something careful, something that didn't need to be loud to be effective. Because by the time I realized what was happening, it had already reached everyone. And suddenly, I wasn't just being treated differently, I was being seen differently. And the worst part was, no one said anything to me directly, not at first. It started small, subtle, the kind of thing you could almost ignore if it didn't keep happening. I walked into the room that afternoon expecting the usual, conversation, laughter, familiar faces, but something felt off immediately. Not obvious, not enough to call out, just enough to notice. People glanced at me, then looked away too quickly. Conversations paused, then picked back up just slightly lower. I told myself not to read into it, told myself I was overthinking, but that feeling stayed, and it followed me, from one room to another, from one conversation to the next, until it stopped feeling like a coincidence and started feeling like a pattern. I remember standing near the doorway, watching everything for a moment, trying to understand what had changed, trying to find where it started, because something had shifted, and somehow I had missed it. Or maybe I wasn't meant to see it yet. I took a slow breath and stepped further inside, keeping my expression calm, composed, because whatever this was, I wasn't going to react without understanding it first. Not yet. But as I moved through the room, that same energy followed me, that same quiet distance, that same careful space people were putting between themselves and me. And then I saw her, across the room, talking, laughing, completely at ease, like nothing had changed, like everything was exactly the way it should be. She looked up for a moment, our eyes met, and she smiled. That same smile, warm, easy, unbothered, and in that moment, something inside me shifted, because now it didn't feel like confusion anymore. It felt like an intention. And I didn't know what she had said. I didn't know what she had done, but I knew one thing for certain. This didn't start today. This had already been in motion before I ever walked into that room, and whatever she had started, it was working. I tried to ignore it at first. I tried to move through the room like I always did, smile, greet people, keep things normal, because sometimes you don't want to see what's right in front of you. Sometimes it's easier to pretend everything is fine than to admit something has changed. But the feeling didn't go away. It followed me. Every step, every glance, every conversation that didn't quite happen the way it used to. I walked over to the kitchen area where a few of them were standing, people I had known for years, people who never hesitated to speak to me before. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light. One of them nodded, another gave a quick smile, but no one was really engaged. No one asked how I was doing. No one continued the conversation, and within seconds, it ended, just like that. I stood there for a moment, letting it settle, because that wasn't normal, not with them, not with me. I moved slowly, not making it obvious, not reacting on the outside, but inside, something was becoming clearer. This wasn't just distance, this was avoidance. I walked past another group, laughter, conversation, then as I got closer, it shifted. Not completely, just enough. Voices lowered, body language changed, and one of them glanced at me, then quickly looked away, like eye contact suddenly meant something it didn't before. I kept walking, steady, composed. But now I wasn't trying to ignore it anymore. I was watching, paying attention, because once you stop explaining things away, you start seeing them for what they are. And what I was seeing was consistent. It wasn't one person. It wasn't one moment. It was everywhere. Small changes, repeated, connected. I stopped near the edge of the room and folded my arms lightly, more to ground myself than anything else, because I needed to think. I needed to understand what I was walking into, and more importantly, why. My mind started going back, replaying the last few days, the last few conversations, trying to find where this could have started, trying to remember if anything felt different before today. And then something came back to me, a moment, small at the time, easy to overlook, but now it didn't feel small anymore. It was earlier that week. She had come over, unannounced, which wasn't unusual. We had that kind of relationship, or at least I thought we did. She walked in like she always did, comfortable, relaxed, smiling. That same smile. We sat down. We talked for a while. Nothing serious, nothing that stood out, at least not at the time. But now, thinking back, there was something different, not in what she said, but in how she said it. She asked more questions than usual, not casual questions, specific ones, careful ones, the kind of questions that sound normal, but aren't. Questions about the family, about certain conversations, about things that didn't seem connected at first. I answered without thinking, because I trusted her, because there was no reason not to. But now, standing there in that room, watching people avoid me, watching conversations shift when I got close, I felt it clearly. That visit wasn't random. That conversation wasn't casual. She was gathering something, piece by piece, and whatever she did with it, it didn't stay between us. I looked up again, scanning the room, and there she was, still talking, still smiling, still moving through the space like everything was perfectly normal, like she hadn't changed anything, like she hadn't touched anything. But now I know better, because whatever had spread through that room, whatever had reached all these people without me knowing, it started somewhere. And for the first time, I wasn't asking if something was wrong anymore. I was asking one question. What exactly did she say about me when I wasn't there to hear it? I didn't move right away. I just stood there, watching, not searching anymore, not guessing, just seeing. Because once something starts to make sense, you don't need to force it anymore. It starts showing itself, clearly. I shifted slightly and walked towards someone I trusted, not just someone familiar, someone who had always been consistent, someone who didn't play games. At least, that's what I believed. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I asked quietly. She looked at me, and for a moment, it felt normal. The same face, the same presence. But then something changed. Not in her words, in her hesitation. "Yeah, sure," she said, but it wasn't natural. It wasn't easy. There was a pause before it, a thought behind it, like she was deciding something before she answered. We stepped a little to the side, away from the others, not completely private, but enough to speak. I kept my voice calm. "I feel like something's off," I said. "I don't know what it is, but I can feel it." She didn't respond right away. She looked down for a second, then back at me, and that's when I saw it.
That look people give when they know something but don't want to be the one to say it. That look told me everything, because if nothing was wrong, there would be no hesitation, no discomfort, no need to think about what to say. "Did something happen?" I asked, still calm, still steady, but more direct now. She exhaled slowly, and that small breath carried more weight than any words could. "I don't think this is the right time," she said. Careful, measured, avoiding, and that was it. That was the moment, the first real crack, because she didn't say no, she didn't say nothing happened, she didn't even try to reassure me. She redirected, which means there was something to redirect from. I nodded slowly, not pushing, not reacting, because I didn't need more than that. I already had enough. "I understand," I said, and I stepped back. But inside, everything had shifted, because now it wasn't a feeling anymore. It wasn't something I was imagining. It wasn't something I was overthinking. It was real. Something had been said. Something had been shared, and people knew it, just not from me. I turned slightly and looked around the room again, and now everything looked different. Not because it changed, but because I understood it. The distance, the silence, the way people avoided eye contact, the way conversations shifted, it all had a source, and I knew exactly where to look. Not in the room, not at the people, at her. Because whatever had been said, whatever had been passed from one person to another, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from someone. And deep down, I already knew who. I glanced across the room again, and there she was, still comfortable, still confident, still smiling like nothing had changed, like nothing had been touched. But now, that smile didn't feel the same anymore. Now it feels calculated, placed, intentional. And that's when I stopped asking myself if I was overthinking and started asking something else entirely. What exactly did she tell them about me that made everyone look at me like this? I didn't stay in that corner, not after that, because once you realize something is happening, you can't pretend you don't see it anymore. So I moved, not quickly, not aggressively, just enough to step back into the room like I belonged there, because I did. At least, I thought I did. I walked toward the table where a few of them were standing, people I had spoken to so many times before, people who never needed a reason to include me, until now. I stopped near them and gave a small nod. "Everything okay?" I asked. Simple, normal, the kind of question that usually leads into a conversation. One of them looked at me, then glanced at someone else, then back at me again. "Yeah, everything is fine," she said, but it wasn't.
You could hear it in her voice. Flat, closed, like she was answering just to end the moment. I gave a small nod and stayed there for a second, waiting, because normally someone would say something else, ask a question, keep it going, but no one did. The silence stretched just long enough to make it clear this wasn't a conversation, it was a dismissal. I stepped back slightly, not reacting, just observing. And as I turned, I heard it. Not loud, not meant for me, but not quiet enough either. "See what I mean?" someone whispered. That was it. That was the moment everything shifted again. Because now it wasn't just behavior, it was confirmation. I didn't turn around, not immediately, because I didn't need to. I had already heard enough. I walked a few steps forward and stopped near another group, trying one more time, not because I didn't believe what I was seeing, but because part of me still wanted to be wrong. "Hey," I said gently. A couple of them looked at me,
One gave a tight smile, another barely acknowledged me. And then something happened that removed any doubt I had left. One of them picked up her phone. I looked down, pretending to be busy. The others shifted their attention elsewhere, like I wasn't standing right there, like I had suddenly become invisible. I stood there for a second, just long enough to feel it fully, because there's a difference between imagining distance and experiencing it, and this was real. I nodded slightly to myself and stepped away. No reaction, no expression, just clarity. Because at this point, it wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't something I had to question. It was direct. It was intentional. And it was consistent. I moved toward the edge of the room again and paused, taking a slow breath, letting everything settle. Because now I understood something important. This wasn't just about her saying something. This was about people believing it, repeating it, acting on it, without ever coming to me, without ever asking me, without giving me the chance to respond. And that's what made it different. That's what made it serious. Because once people start treating you differently based on something you never said, something you never did, it means the story about you has already taken shape. And now I wasn't just dealing with one person, I was dealing with what she created. I lifted my head slightly and looked across the room again, and there she was, still calm, still smiling, still moving through conversations like everything was under control, like nothing had shifted. But I could see it now, the way people leaned in when she spoke, the way they listened, the way they trusted her version of whatever she had said. And that's when it hit me clearly. This wasn't random. This wasn't careless. This was deliberate. And whatever she told them, it was strong enough to change how they saw me without ever hearing from me. I held that thought for a moment, because once you realize that, everything becomes simpler, not easy, but clearer. Because now I knew what I was facing, and more importantly, I knew what I needed to do next. I wasn't going to guess anymore. I wasn't going to wait for someone to explain it. I wasn't going to let it stay quiet, because whatever she said about me, I was going to hear it directly. And this time, I wasn't going to stand back and watch it happen. I stepped away from the noise, not far, just enough to think, because everything that had just happened didn't feel random anymore. It felt connected, like pieces of something I hadn't been paying attention to were finally lining up.
I found a quiet spot and sat down, my hands resting in my lap. My eyes were not really focused on anything in front of me because my mind had already gone somewhere else, back to the last time everything felt normal, before this feeling started, before people looked at me like they didn't recognize me anymore. And that's when I thought about her again. Not from today, from before, from the beginning of whatever this was, that visit earlier in the week, the one I didn't think much about at the time, but now it didn't feel small anymore. I could see it clearly, the way she walked in, comfortable, relaxed, like she always did, the way she smiled, that same smile, easy, familiar, trustworthy. We sat down and started talking, nothing serious at first, just the usual. But then the conversation shifted, slowly, subtly, the kind of shift you don't question while it's happening, but you notice later. She started asking questions, not casual ones, specific ones, about the family, about certain conversations, about things that didn't seem connected at the time. I answered without thinking, because there was no reason not to, because I trusted her, because I believed she was asking out of care. But now, sitting there, watching how everyone had pulled away from me, I saw it differently. Those weren't just questions, that was information, and she was collecting it, piece by piece, carefully, like she already knew what she was going to do with it. I leaned back slightly and took a slow breath, because the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. She wasn't confused, she wasn't guessing, she was building something, and whatever she built, she didn't keep it to herself. She shared it, passed it on, let it move from one person to another until it reached everyone, until it became something people believed without ever hearing from me. I looked down at my hands for a moment, still, steady, but something inside me had changed, because it's one thing to feel left out, it's another thing to realize you were pushed out, not suddenly, not loudly, but intentionally. And that's what this was. Not a misunderstanding, not a mistake, a decision. I lifted my head slowly and looked back across the room. People were still talking, still moving, still acting like everything was normal, but I could see it now. The distance wasn't accidental. The silence wasn't random. It came from something, something she started, and something everyone else accepted. And that's when it hit me in a way it hadn't before. This didn't start today. It started the moment she walked into my home and started asking questions I didn't think twice about. And now I was dealing with the result of that, not just her words, but what those words turned into. I sat there for a moment longer, not upset, not overwhelmed, just aware. Because once you understand where something started, you stop chasing confusion and you start moving toward clarity. And that's exactly what I was going to do. Because whatever she told them, whatever version of me she created, I was going to face it directly. Not later, not eventually, now. Not rushed, not uncertain, just ready. Because sitting there any longer wasn't going to change anything. I had already seen enough, felt enough, understood enough. Now it was time to move. I walked back into the room, more aware than before, not watching everything, not questioning everything, just focused. Because now I wasn't trying to figure out if something was wrong, I was looking for where it would show itself next. And it didn't take long. As I moved past one of the groups, someone shifted slightly, not away from me, not toward me, just enough to signal something. I slowed down, not stopping completely, just enough to acknowledge it. And that's when she spoke. Not loud, not public, just enough for me to hear. "You might want to be careful," she said. I turned slightly toward her, not surprised, just attentive. "Careful about what?" I asked, my voice calm, controlled, because I already knew this wasn't random. She glanced around quickly, making sure no one was paying attention, then looked back at me. Her expression wasn't cold, it wasn't distant like the others, it was uneasy. "I'm just saying people are talking," she said. There it was again, talking. That word carried more weight than anything else. "What are they saying?" I asked. No hesitation, no fear, just direct. She paused, not long, but long enough to show she was choosing her words carefully. "I don't know everything," she said, and I could tell that part was true. "But it's not good," she added, quietly, almost like she didn't want the words to travel any further than they already had. I nodded slightly because I wasn't expecting a full answer, not yet, but this confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something that had already spread, something people were repeating without fully understanding it. "Do you believe it?" I asked. That question caught her off guard. I could see it immediately, because people don't expect to be asked that, not when they're trying to stay in the middle, not when they're trying not to take sides. I don't know, she said, honest, uncomfortable, and that was enough, because that told me everything. She had heard it. She had seen how people were reacting, but she didn't have anything solid, just words passed from one person to another. I nodded once. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it, because even that small moment, even that quiet warning gave me direction. She stepped back slightly, relieved, like she had said just enough without getting pulled into it. I turned away from her and looked across the room again, and now everything made sense in a different way. Not the details, not the full story, but the structure of it, the way it moved, the way it spread, the way it reached people who weren't even there when it started. It all came from one place, and it grew from there until it became something people accepted without questioning it. And now, I wasn't just seeing it, I wasn't just feeling it, I was stepping into it, because whatever they believed about me, whatever version of me they were passing around, I was going to hear it directly, not through whispers, not through distance, but from the source. I took a slow breath and started walking again, not wandering, not observing, moving with purpose now, because I wasn't going to wait for this to come to me anymore. I was going to go straight to it, straight to her, because whatever she said, whatever she started, it was time for her to say it while I was standing right in front of her. I didn't stop walking. Not this time. Because everything had already led to this moment. The looks, the silence, the way people pulled away without saying anything. It all pointed back to one place, and I was done standing on the outside of it. She was still across the room, talking, smiling, like nothing had changed, like everything was still under control. I walked toward her, steady, focused, not rushed, because this wasn't about emotion. This was about clarity. She noticed me before I reached her. Her conversation slowed, then stopped. The person she was speaking to stepped back slightly, like they could feel it. This wasn't going to be casual. I stopped in front of her, close enough that she couldn't pretend I wasn't there. "I need to talk to you," I said. My voice is calm, even, but firm. She looked at me, held her composure, that same controlled expression. "What's going on?" she asked, like she didn't already know. I didn't respond to that. I went straight to it. "I've been hearing things," I said. No accusation in my tone, no raised voice, just the truth. Her expression didn't change immediately, but I saw it. A small shift, the kind you only notice when you're paying attention. "I don't know what you mean," she replied. Quick, too quick. I held her gaze, not reacting, not stepping back, because I wasn't there to argue. I was there to remove the space she was trying to create.
I continued. People are talking, and it didn't start on its own. Now there was a pause. Not long, but enough, because she understood exactly what I was saying. I think you're overthinking this, she said. Still controlled, still careful, but now there was effort behind it. I nodded slightly. That's possible, which is why I'm asking you directly. My voice stayed steady, clear, because I wasn't giving her room to redirect this. Not anymore. What did you tell them about me? I asked. That landed. You could feel it. Not just in her, in the space around us. The room didn't go silent, but something shifted. Attention moved. Attention noticed. Even if they weren't looking directly. She didn't answer right away. And that hesitation said more than anything else. Because if there was nothing behind it, there would be no pause, no thought, no need to choose words. But she was choosing, carefully. I didn't say anything that wasn't already known, she said finally. And there it was. Not denial, not confusion, just a statement. And that told me everything. Because now it wasn't about whether she said something. It was about what she believed she had the right to say. I nodded slowly, taking that in. Then say it now, I said. Calm, direct, in front of me. Another pause, longer this time, because this was different. This wasn't whispering. This wasn't behind closed doors. This was real, and she knew it. I'm not going to do this here, she said. And that was it. Not refusal, avoidance, which is its own kind of answer. I held her gaze for a moment. Not angry, not emotional, just clear. Because I understand now. She wasn't going to say it. Not directly. Not where it could be questioned. Not where I could respond in real time. But she didn't need to. Because everything around it had already said enough. I took a small breath, then nodded once. All right. And I stepped back. Not because I was finished, but because I had what I needed. The confirmation, the source, the truth behind the silence. I turned slightly and looked around the room. And now I could see it clearly. Not just what was happening, but why. This wasn't just something she said once.
This was something she had built, shared, repeated, until it became something people believed. And now it was time to hear exactly what that was, from someone who wouldn't avoid it. Because this wasn't ending here. Not like this. I didn't leave. Not after that. Because now I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't trying to piece things together. I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and I wasn't going to walk away without hearing it fully. I turned and stepped back into the center of the room, not slowly, not aggressively, just directly, because whatever had been said about me, it was already out there, and the only thing left was to bring it into the open. A few people noticed, not all at once, but enough, the kind of shift you feel when attention starts moving. I stopped where I could be seen, not for attention, for clarity. I think it's time this gets said out loud, I said, My voice is steady, not loud, but clear enough to carry. Conversations slowed. Some stopped. Others pretended not to, but they were listening. I could feel it. I've been hearing things about myself, I continued, and instead of guessing, I'd rather hear it directly. No one spoke at first, not immediately, and that silence said more than anything, because when something is true, people don't hesitate, but when something is built on assumption, people pause, because no one wants to own it. I looked from one face to the next, not accusing, not emotional, just a present. Someone said something, I added, and it spread. That landed, because now they knew exactly what I was talking about. A few glances, a few shifts in posture, that quiet discomfort that comes when something hidden is brought forward. Then finally, a voice, from the side, not strong, not confident, but clear enough to carry. We were told, "You've been lying." The words settled into the room, heavy, direct. I didn't react immediately, because reacting too quickly would have made it emotional, and this wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about the truth. Lying about what? I asked. Calm, focused. The woman who spoke hesitated, but she didn't step back. "You've been saying things about the family," she continued. "That isn't true." I let that sit, because now everything is connected. The distance, the silence, the way people avoided me, it all came from this. Not something I did, something they believed, something that had been passed from one person to another until it became something real in their minds. "Who told you that?" I asked. No anger, just direction. Another pause, another set of glances, and then the answer came. "She did," someone said quietly. And just like that, everything pointed back to her. I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to, because I already knew. I had known, but now it was spoken, confirmed, out in the open. I nodded slowly, taking it in, not as a shock, but for clarity, because once something is said out loud, it loses the power it had in silence. I looked back at them, all of them, faces that once felt familiar, now just uncertain, waiting, trying to understand what happens next. "There's nothing I've said about anyone that isn't true," I said. Clear, direct, no hesitation. If there was ever a question, it could have been brought to me. That landed, because that was the truth behind all of it. No one asked, no one came to me. They listened, they repeated, they believed, without ever hearing my side. "And if something was said," I continued, "then let's talk about it openly. No raised voice, no emotion, just control, because I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there to remove the confusion." I could see it now. No belief yet, but a shift, because the truth doesn't always convince immediately, but it disrupts certainty, and that's what was happening. Right there, at that moment, everything they thought they knew was starting to crack, and for the first time since I walked into that room, the silence wasn't against me, it was around them. No one spoke right away, not after that, because once something is said out loud, it changes the room. The same people who avoided me earlier were standing there now, not distant, not dismissive, just unsure. I looked around slowly, not searching, not reacting, just seeing things clearly for what they were, because nothing had really changed at that moment, not instantly, but something important had shifted. The certainty they had was gone, and without that certainty, everything else started to fall apart. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't try to convince anyone, because I didn't need to. The truth doesn't need pressure. It just needs space. And now it has it. One of them looked down,
Another stepped back slightly. The woman who spoke earlier no longer held the same confidence, and that told me everything, because belief is strong until it's questioned. I took a slow breath and straightened slightly, not to prove anything, just because I could, because the weight I felt walking into that room was no longer mine. I'm not going to defend something I didn't do, I said, calm, clear, not directed at one person, but understood by everyone. If anyone has something to ask me, I continued, you can ask me directly. Simple, firm, final. I let that settle, then added one more thing. But I won't stay in a place where people decide who I am without ever speaking to me first. That shifted something, quietly, but completely. Because now it wasn't about what they said anymore, it was about what I accepted, and I wasn't accepting it, not anymore. I looked around one last time, not for approval, not for agreement, just to see. Because earlier I walked into that room unsure, trying to understand what had changed. Now I understand everything, not just what was said, but how easily it was believed. And that mattered, because it showed me something I couldn't ignore. I turned away, not slowly, not dramatically, just done. And as I walked toward the door, something felt different. Not lighter because everything was fixed, but clearer because I wasn't carrying confusion anymore. I wasn't questioning myself anymore. I wasn't trying to figure out where I went wrong. I knew I hadn't, and that changed everything. I stepped outside. The air felt still, calm, unbothered by everything that had just happened inside. And for the first time that day, I paused, not to look back, but to recognize something. I didn't lose anything in that room. I saw it, clearly. And sometimes that's more valuable than anything you think you've lost. Because when people show you how easily they can believe something about you without hearing from you, you don't need to fight to stay. You need to understand what it means. I took a breath and continued walking, steady, certain, because I didn't need that space to define me, and I didn't need their belief to validate me. I already knew the truth, and that was enough. I keep thinking about that moment, not when everything was said, but when I realized how quickly people believed it. Because sometimes it's not the words that hurt the most, it's how easily people accept them without ever asking you. So let me ask you something else. If you were in that room, what would you have done? Would you stay quiet, or would you speak up like she did? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like this speak to you, if you understand what it feels like to be misunderstood, judged, or pushed aside, subscribe to Quiet Voice of Her Life, because some stories are quiet, but they stay with you.